Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Effectively Communicate Appreciation to Remote Employees, hosted by Terryberry. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping notes. We have everyone on listen-only mode for the best sound quality. Please feel free to submit your feedback and your questions anytime throughout today's presentation using the questions section located in your tool tray to the right. Today's presentation is approved for recertification credits. We'll share those activity numbers at the end of today's presentation. I'm pleased to welcome our speakers for today. Is the managing partner of Terryberry and a frequent speaker on the topic of recognition to business groups around the world. Terryberry has developed recognition programs for thousands of businesses around the world that range from small family businesses to Fortune 500 companies. Our guest today is Dr. Paul White. Dr. Paul is a psychologist, author, speaker, and consultant who makes work relationships work. For the past 20+ years, he's improved numerous businesses, government agencies, and nonprofit organizations by helping them create positive workplace relationships and improve staff morale. Thank you, Dr. Paul and Mike, for being here today.
You bet, my pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Kelsey and Dr. Paul. We are always thrilled to work with you. You know, Terryberry has a long-standing relationship with you, and we're just big fans of you, the work that you do, the books that you've written, and you know that list just goes on and on. So, you know, we've got a great turnout today. We've have 1,000 people online with us here. Because this topic, this is such a topical subject, and you know, so many organizations have been forced to shift through this pandemic to more people than ever working at home. As you and I sit here in this webcast, we're working from home like so many people, and so we saw that adjustment at Terryberry. We saw it for ourselves, for our 250 employees, and then certainly we see that same thing happening with our customers, where you know the shift has happened, and you know the question that we're getting more and more, and we're excited to address, and that's part of what you're going to talk about today. Obviously, is you know how do we make people feel valued, appreciated, and for people especially who are new to the working remotely, how do we have that culture continue and people feel connected? So you're an expert in this. You were talking about recognizing remote employees but long before any pandemic conversations, but have you seen some things change here just in the last month as people and businesses have adapted to sort of this crisis mode?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, and we're going to talk about the specifics on that, but with millions literally of new remote employees, the landscape has clearly changed.
Yeah, it certainly has, and you've got some great data to share, and that people are interested. I think you know there's just new pressure out there, and at Terryberry, one of the things that we've seen change really quick is for our customers that are using our software with our Give a Wow and 360 recognition. It's been neat to see the communication aspects of that really emphasized, and we're seeing users more active in these programs than they ever have before. And one of the messages that we've gone out to the marketplace with it in a show of support is we've developed our quick launch version of 360 recognition, which is called Give a Wow Connect. And the pure goal of that is to get companies up and running quickly with the essential features of 360 recognition. And that's something that we plan to offer to everybody who participates in this today. We traditionally was reserved for customers, but we're trying to expand that a little bit beyond that. So that's another benefit. We always try to make our webcast as interactive as possible. And so we've got, in addition to the good information that Dr. White's going to share, we've got people standing by, experts standing by to answer questions. I'm sure that there'll be a lot of questions with a group this large. So we have both two leaders at Terryberry, and Mike Anderson and Justin Anderson that will field questions. And our goal, again, is to make this as interactive as possible and get you information that's valuable, that addresses your needs. And then also another way we try to offer some benefit is, that if you have questions, we're going to have some time at the end to field questions live. And if you submit a question that is answered at the end, Dr. Paul has very generously offered copies of his book to the individuals who participate in that way, who have a question that's answered live. And the 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace is a terrific read. It applies to what we're talking about today. And, so there's a lot of ways to get involved. In addition to that, we had some polls earlier. So we always try to give people and we'll have some additional polls down the road. So kind of trying to set the table a little bit for you, Dr. White. It's good to see you again. Last time I saw you, you were at our offices. Now no one's at our offices. So let me hand it over to you to kind of set the table for what we're going to talk about next.
Cool. Thank you, Mike. And hello, everybody, and welcome. Let me just get this out front because this is probably the number one question that people ask is, okay, how can I get a version of the slide deck? I'm going to be able to send that to you, as well as links to the research that we've published. And also, I'm in the midst of doing some more that we just finished this week and going to be analyzing and writing about, and be able to notify you about that. And also give you a discount for taking our online assessment that I'll tell you about a little bit more later. It's Motivating by Appreciation Inventory. So to get all those, all you have to do is email me at yesdrpaul@gmail.com. I set that up specifically for this, and just put Terryberry in the subject line, and we'll get you those. So if you want the handouts, listen up, just email me. I know, and I'll give that to you again later. yesdrpaul@gmail. All right, so let's get going. The context for what we're talking about, I mean, remote employees have been increasing significantly over the past decade, and that's been a trend that we've seen. And so I had to start to think about the differences for people that work offsite. And in fact, 80 to 90% of U.S. employees report that they'd like to work remotely at least part of the time. And I think that's where we're heading. I think a lot of people will start maybe working a day a week or something like that. And I'll tell you why here in a little bit. But as we all know, tens of millions of workers in the U.S. have become remote employees in the past 6 to 8 weeks. I mean, it's just been boom, it happened all of a sudden. And so we have this, initial group of, remote employees, but we have this, what I call newly remote employees. And new remote employees, they're different because they or we were forced to work remotely. We didn't choose to do this, right? And so whether that's by the government's policies or by our employers, so that's different than if you signed on and were hired to work remotely. Not only are most of us working remotely, but we're working remotely from home, which is a whole different set of factors and issues that brings up, obviously. And then you also have the context that there are just additional stressors in our lives going on, that even if it was just working remotely or from home, we have the issue of health concerns for ourselves and for our family members, the financial difficulties, maybe our spouse has been laid off or is furloughed. There's the social isolation issue of, being at home and not being able to get out and about and interact with family and friends. And then also for some people, I've talked to a friend who he said he's the IT director at home now for his wife and 3 kids. And so he's having to manage their passwords and all that. And so there's just, additional issues going on. Now, when we think about this newness of working at home and remotely, there's a lot of new, right? I mean, you have a new work setting. Your daily routine is different because you're not maybe having to get up and get dressed, get in the car, head to your favorite coffee spot and then drive into work. I mean, just the schedule has changed. New technology, maybe not, the hardware, but software and figuring that out and getting it to work right. And an issue related to that is I have actually one of my team members, she's working from home, her husband is, and has 2 kids who are being schooled. And so the bandwidth for 4 of them to be on video wise isn't there. So we have to manage that. New processes from working remotely, everybody on the team doing that, ways of communicating that, used to you maybe would go stop by somebody's office and check in and chat about something that's not really possible right now. The issue of distractions. In our research, one of the interesting factors I saw is that a number of people, I think they were women to be honest, were saying how distracting their spouse was to them. So that's there. The whole rhythm of life, and a lot of us have maybe been involved with sports with our kids, and that's not there, and just different things. Access or not having access to certain resources. I know I have to run into the office occasionally to get some files or something that I need that I would otherwise have at my desk or in my office. Sources for meals. I mean, a lot of us maybe would, go out for lunch or grab breakfast on the way. Well, we're having to do something different, and there's good and bad with that, but it's new. Personal responsibilities as far as maybe within the home or in the community, things that, maybe other people were handling, you were on a team, and that's not happening now. And then, a new social support system, which for a lot of people is now their nuclear family, and or connecting with your social support virtually. So there's a lot there, but I'd like to hear from you all. What other new factors do you see remote employees and yourself having to deal with? And use either the Q&A section, I think it's maybe the chat box, and just send those in, and Mike will read some of those to us, because we all have different experiences, and especially I guess one thing I think about right off the top is just people that maybe have worked different shifts, maybe worked the graveyard shift or night shift, and that's not happening now, and so now their sleep patterns are new or whatever. But Mike, when you've got a few, share some of the other new things that people are having reporting they have to deal with.
There's a lot coming in right now. I will start with the first one that's become a challenge for me is you talked about meals. My problem is access to too many meals. I think I'm at about 4 square meals a day with some additional snacks in between. So that's a big challenge. You're seeing things like accountability for time, homeschooling kids came up for a couple. There are so many different organizational aspects of things. Some people feel like they're not working enough hours. Some people feel like they're working too many hours, or that the standard hours have shifted. And I'm sure, I know we have a lot of human resource people on the line with us here today, and so many of those individuals have been thrust into this conversation about how to help the organization adapt. So there's certainly folks that are talking about the ability to stay focused and these additional pressures of keeping everything together remotely. Right. So a lot of the things you touched on, but wow, what a great list. Thanks for those thoughts, everyone.
Yeah, it's interesting. I love to learn during these experiences, because there's so much going on, and we can't think of it all or don't experience it all. But thanks for sharing that. Now, interestingly, I mean, most of us have dealt with change in the workplace, and how to deal with that. But just to net it out, we have, each of us have different kinds of responses and different kinds of responses over time. I mean, sometimes it's anxiety when people have some kind of change, they get anxious about it because it raises unpredictability. For others of us, it's more like, oh, hey, this is sort of interesting, and let's see what happens here. And so it's almost more like a curiosity kind of response. For some people, they withdraw. They're like, oh, I don't like this. I'm going to hang in and try to, sort of cloister myself and keep my own daily life the same. Some people get excited about it, and they're looking for change and they pursue it. Other people become sort of indecisive and paralyzed. They're those like, especially those personality styles that need a lot of information to make decisions. When there's new information coming virtually every day, it's tough to do that. And at what point do you pull the trigger on it? There's obviously resistance to it and not liking it. In this situation, it sort of was foisted on all of us, and that we can try to resist, but it's just sort of reality of what's going on. And so we're probably going to be drug along if we're digging our heels in and going to have to change anyway. And, some of us are energized to action. So if I net it out sort of visually, I mean, there's sort of two major responses. One is that anxious sort of withdraw and tend to get passive response. And there's some benefits to that. Sometimes you need to wait before you move out and make changes. And then other people are like, all right, let's go after it. And it's important to remember that, because for your team members, there are those differences among your team members, and even team members I know for myself, there's sometimes where I'm sort of excited about it, other times I'm anxious. I do want to raise an important point, because there's some confusion I see in the marketplace about employee relationships and about human development, actually, that there are a lot of people that really focus on empathy, and we need to be empathetic towards others, and that's a good thing, and also to have compassion. But I want to help you understand that those aren't your first responses, or shouldn't be. That doing that can actually lead to some problems and some errors. And the reason is because both of those are built on a more foundational skill that I think our culture lacks, and that's called perspective taking ability. It's the ability to see a situation from somebody else's point of view. And it's sort of like when and it's a lifelong journey of growing this, from, sharing your toys when you got 4 trucks and your friends got 1, or none, you share, or you take the last brownie on the kitchen table when you come home, even though your siblings haven't had it, to, understanding that somebody else is in a different situation. We have to be able to have that. And, empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another, and we want to get there. But if we don't have the understanding first, it's a problem. And then compassion is the sympathetic concern for the sufferings and misfortunes of others. And compassion really drives us to action. It should. And so I would suggest that really the model we want to think about, and I'll get practical with this in a second, but is we want to start with perspective taking ability. We want to understand cognitively, thinking wise, what's their situation like. It's sort of that old saying of, walk a mile in another person's shoes, that you sort of see life from their perspective. And we need to be able to do that. That then leads to understanding of what's going on with them, maybe why they're reacting the way they are, which leads us to be able to have empathy for them, to enter into feeling and experiencing that along with them. And then that leads to compassionate action. And I would propose that compassion without action is really meaningless. That's the purpose of it. It's to drive us to act, to help out the other person. So empathy requires both a cognitive understanding of what's going on with the person and then emotional intelligence. And some people have more or less of both, obviously, but we want to start with the understanding part, and then we can sort of come alongside and feel with them. And then true compassion, like I said, it's not just a feeling. We just don't feel for them. It actually results in an action of what we need to do. And that's important as we work with our team members and leaders to help them see that just sort of feeling sorry for somebody, you may or may not get it right, what's they're really going on with them. And secondly, we need to figure out how to respond. So that ties into the importance of appreciation. And I'm going to just give a real brief overview, because a lot of you know about this. If you don't, check out my book or our website, appreciationatwork.com. Got all kinds of videos and so forth. But people want to feel appreciated for what they do. We've got to encourage ourselves ultimately, but we want to know that somebody else values what we do. But unfortunately, most people in the workplace don't feel appreciated. And that's really been our goal at Appreciation at Work, is to help give the tools and resources and training to help people do that. 65% of North Americans, once they showed that they've received no recognition or appreciation at their workplace in the past year. So they're just not hearing it. I think sometimes it's out there, but it's just not getting to them. And you may say, well, our company's pretty good at it, or I'm pretty good. Well, other research shows that 51% of managers think they're doing a pretty good job of recognizing employees for work well done. I think that's a pretty realistic viewpoint is not 95% saying I'm doing a great job. The problem is only 17% of the people that work for them say that the manager's doing a good job. And just a reminder, if you want, access to the research and all that, just email me at yesdrpaul@gmail and I'll get that to you. It's sort of like this. I mean, this gal says, if I walk past your desk without stopping to criticize your work, that counts as a compliment. And some people manage that way. You probably know some. And it just doesn't work. The silence doesn't get it done. So the core principle that our work is built on is that not everybody feels appreciated in the same ways. And most of us intellectually assent to this, but maybe our actions don't always do it because we sort of do the same one or two things for other people. And that's where the 5 languages of appreciation come in. They're the same in name as the 5 love languages, but look differently in daily work life. So words of affirmation, quality time, acts of service, tangible gifts, and yes, even physical touch, which it was difficult before, but we're gonna have to sort of work with it before. I'm trying to figure out, can you give a backhanded high five or maybe just a fist bump? I thought about elbows, but somebody said, well, they were told not to do the elbows because we're sneezing into our elbows. Oh, we got to figure that out. The point is that most of the time, people think about appreciation as words, and actually less than half of the population, we've had over 240,000 people take our online assessment, the Motivating by Appreciation Inventory. 46% of people do prefer words, so it's the primary language, but that means 54% will choose one of those other languages in the ways that they prefer to be shown appreciation. So words, quality time, it's not necessarily time with your supervisor. Lots of times people want time with one another. Acts of service isn't rescuing a low-performing colleague, but it's often in those time-limited situations where you're working to get a project done. What's something somebody can do to help you get it done? That could be, help out with some of their daily tasks, or, when we're in on-site settings, bring in a meal so you can keep working and so forth. Tangible gifts, is not necessarily bonuses and that kind of stuff. It can be a recognition award, like Terryberry, is really good at personalizing those. It can be also just as simple as, their favorite cup of coffee, or in this situation, maybe sending them an email with a link to something that they would like. Physical touch, it's largely spontaneous celebration. It's how we celebrate when things go well. So again, I'm not going to go into all that. Those are full presentations on that as well. But if you go to appreciationatwork.com, you can access a lot of that information. And then there's differences not only across the languages, but how do you show appreciation in on-site relationships versus remote? And so a few years ago, 2 years ago, actually, we did research where we compared 86,000 employees, some of whom were remote and others on-site, and said, okay, how do these people differ in how they want to be shown appreciation? So what we found is that the general patterns are pretty similar, that words still is number 1, even for people off-site. Quality time is second, acts of service is third, but desire for quality time really increased significantly. It went from like, I think 25 to 35%, and sort of the words shifted from 46 down to 36. And so it's time. Now you think, how do you spend time remotely? Well, that was one of the challenges, and we followed up and found out that really to be effective in showing appreciation to remote employees, or when we're all remote, the first practical thing people said, and this is sort of obvious now, but it wasn't then, is to connect by video and do, whether that's FaceTime or, video conferencing and so forth. And people like that more than just, emailing, talking on the phone, that there's a personal connection, that face-to-face kind of thing. I think we realize and understand that now. And then the other part about it is that you really need to be proactive to show appreciation remotely, because when you're off-site, you don't have those sort of chance encounters where you're walking by their office, or you see them in the break room, or you're walking in from the parking lot together, or whatever, where you maybe chat some and find out what's going on. And you see them and it reminds you wanted to tell them something and thank them for something they did. You don't have those. So, I mean, we don't walk by each other's, desktop, connection now. And so you have to think about it and be proactive about it and really sort of plan about it. And that's a key piece. Now, the other key piece is that, and this is true whether it's on-site or remote, but clearly it's important to understand that if you're a supervisor or manager, it's not just about you, it's about colleagues and peers connecting with one another. So I know my team, they're talking and chatting when I'm not on, and that we want to be encouraged and appreciated and be able to encourage others versus just a top-down sort of manager, supervisor, report kind of relationship. So you need to figure out, and so that's when we first started our training with the 5 languages of appreciation, we focused on managers and supervisors, but fairly quickly we got feedback that, hey, we want to know how to communicate appreciation to our peers, and also I value it from my peers. Third part that's also important is that it needs to be personal. That if lots of times, especially in the past, when we were talking or communicating with remote employees, it was around work tasks, right? It's about a project you're working on, and you're checking in about it. If you only talk about work, we then sort of denigrate down to people just feeling like they're just a production unit. They're just a worker. They're not a person. And one of our core values is that employees, owners, supervisors, we're all people. We're people before we started working here. We're going to be people during and after. We have a life outside of work, and that's even more obvious now. And so if we don't communicate and ask about what's going on personally, we're really missing a large part of what's going on with them, and they're not going to feel understood and valued. And so there's 2 parts. One is to share some personally, that it's a two-way relationship. They can say, like last night, we had a couple of friends come by. I live out in the country, and we took a walk together, social distancing. But, it was nice. It was the first, in fact, he said, wow, this is the most exciting thing we've done in 3 weeks. So it was sort of like, sharing about that. Or, I have a friend who's got, their mother living with them that's ill, and that's different and challenging. So we don't only want to talk and interact about work, and so that means that you have to either proactively set up a call. Okay, so one of the things we want to focus on is that really this large group of newly remote employees are different than people who have been working remotely for a while, and so we want to find out, okay, what's going on with these millions of people who have just started working remotely. And so we want to really, like we talked about, we want to understand what's going on with them. So how do we do that? For me, one way is to do some research to find out what they're experiencing. So just recently, we did just a one-time pulse survey where we sent out an invitation for people to participate, and had over, I don't know, 100 or so respond, and I'm going to share those results with you. And then in addition to that, we had a larger group respond that we chose based on a number of variables to make it representative, and have 50 people going through a 4-week study, and we're just completing that and are going to be sharing the results here pretty quickly in the next couple of weeks. So let me share about this pulse study, the people that responded. As you might be, it makes sense that there were financial concerns for them. Interestingly, the current financial situation really didn't differ much. I mean, their current wages haven't changed. Why? Because they're remotely employed. But when they're looking forward into the future 6 months, their concern rises, and really it was just sort of a moderate amount. I mean, it wasn't like everybody was super anxious about it, but about half of them reported at least some moderate to high levels of anxiety over the future, which obviously makes sense given sort of the instability of situations. Now I want to talk to you about anxiety, because that was another major theme of people were anxious about different things. And so first, though, I'd like to sort of find out what your current level of anxiety is. And this is partly to sort of compare what you are thinking and feeling in comparison to the people that we polled, and also to compare what we're going to do with the one-time responders versus over time. So take a minute here and just respond to this, and then we'll share. And it is interesting to me that, as we'll see, the results from this group of remote employees is different than what you hear on the major media, because the major media are talking about the whole population, many of whom, 30 million or so, are unemployed, so their anxiety is going to be higher. So thank you for responding, and here's what we've got. There's a few of you that aren't anxious at all, which is great. There are a moderate amount, sort of 38% that are just a little bit anxious, 39% a moderate, 14% quite a bit, and 3% extremely high. So clearly sort of on that lower end of average, and that makes sense to me, given your life situations. Let me share what we found for the respondents of this poll study. They were a little bit up the scale. Moderately was 34%, quite a bit was 28%, and extremely only 5%. So, a little bit more. Their situation was a little more tenuous than probably most of yours. But even so, only 5% felt really, really anxious. But what was interesting as we looked at it, because we asked what they were anxious about, is that, and I was actually encouraged by this, is that their anxiety was primarily focused on the impact of the pandemic on other people, both globally and their loved ones, their family and friends, versus themselves. So that was sort of a nice picture that it's not just all self-focused. And when looking at that more specifically, here are the things that they reported either considerable or great amount of anxiety about. First of all, overall, just the impact of the coronavirus on the world at large, up at 55%, which was the highest individual factor that they rated. The overall economy was at 42%. Health of a family member is interesting. It was up at 35%, while their personal health was down at 14%. Being able to buy what's needed, given the recent history of sort of the hoarding and buying of large amounts of things that make the shelves empty. And then their future financial status was only 19%. So again, sort of a moderate level. So interesting to me, just the things that at this point in time, which was just about 3 weeks ago, what people were mainly anxious about. We're going to see how that changes over time in our current study. Now, it's easy and to sort of talk about anxiety and just report it, but I want to give you some tools to help you, both you and help your team members deal with anxiety so that we understand it. First of all, we need to understand that anxiety is really just a small fear. It's a concern. And depending how anxious you are, it can grow, obviously, but that's sort of, it's in that fear realm. And anxiety is always future oriented. We're not usually anxious about the past. We might be anxious about how the past impacts the future, but it's always about what's going to happen, or what won't happen. And so that's really helpful in helping us understand some ways to deal with it. Anxiety can both be rational and irrational, right? I mean, and that's where you get into anxiety disorders sometimes, where not only the level of anxiety is high, but that people start to become anxious about things they don't really need to be. I mean, I could, sit here and be anxious about getting hit by a meteor. It happens once every, 10,000 years or something like that, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time worrying about it because, the probability is low. Now, anxiety actually has a couple of positive functions. One is it helps motivate us to protect. I mean, if you're afraid you're going to get hit by a car that's coming on, it helps you move to get out of the way. And it also motivates us to other kinds of actions that can help us avoid the dangerous situation. So there's a benefit. It's not all bad. I mean, there are times when we should be somewhat concerned and take appropriate action. So the way to manage a person's anxiety when it just feels like it's sort of taking over our lives is is first of all, examine the reality basis of the fear. I mean, like the meteor, it's not really likely to happen, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time about it. Is there a reality basis of maybe losing my job or, income going down? Possibly. And so I need to take a look at that and then sort of assess the appropriate level of concern. I mean, is it something that I just need to lose sleep over every night all the time? Or is it something that, okay, I need to think about this and do something about it? And that's where we want to go. But the other thing that really is helpful with anxiety is to limit the amount of time frame that you're considering. Since it's about the future, we can worry about, 6 months or a year from now, and we don't really know what's going on with that. And so it's sort of a waste of time and energy. But if we shorten that time frame into maybe the next week, maybe even the next day or so, depending how much we're struggling, say, okay, I know what I need to do today, and I'm going to be okay today, and focus on the present rather than the future. That helps sort of manage and limit our anxiety. And then determine what actions would be helpful to manage the risk. And so there are some things you do. So let's say if you're worried about cash flow in the future personally, you can take some actions now to reduce sort of discretionary spending so that you're saving some cash for possible needs later. And one of the things about anxiety is it drives some people to action and other people to withdraw. And sometimes the actions aren't that helpful. It's just a waste of energy. And so if you have somebody who's responding with sort of that activated response, you want to give them something productive to do so that they're using their energy well. So I hope that's helpful for you. And I think that can be really helpful to your team members as you work with them to help them sort of manage their anxiety as well. One of the key things, and it was a cool sort of theme, was just the positive responses that these newly remote employees had as far as responding to the newness of their situation. I was fascinated to see that 97% were reported being thankful about a lot of other things in their lives. 85% said they're generally happy. 81% said, this makes me determined to get through it. The flip side of it, only 3% were feeling any sense of hopelessness, which is great. So there was still a sense of, okay, we can get through this and make it happen. 83% reported that they felt that they were at least moderately productive while working at home. And not that many people were reporting feeling lonely at this point either. So I think there was a healthy positive response. Initially, again, we're going to see how that flows over time with our second group that we're looking at, but that was a good piece of data to see. So the other part that we did is that we wanted to give people a chance to share more personally about what's going on. So we had some open-ended questions that we asked them to answer. And one of them was, what are you mainly concerned about right now? And health concerns, both for themselves and their family, was the highest rated group. And there were comments like, concerned about keeping my parents safe and healthy, overall the health and well-being of my family, not getting sick. So health, given sort of the focus on the virus itself and its spread and dangerousness, that makes sense. And then the other concern that they were having was just work-life balance and family relationships. How to balance working from home with their family needs. Sometimes it was concerned about like their senior adult parents in a retirement home, or on the other side, having to deal with kids at home and doing school at home. So again, those made sense. It was just interesting to see sort of how they fell out percentage-wise. The second question we asked was, okay, what's the major challenge that you're facing right now that you have to deal with? So it's sort of concerned, but what's really, staring you in the face you need to deal with? And over half of them identified work-related challenges. I mean, being able to keep focused on work, working by phone versus just physically meeting with clients, getting the technology set up, and all that. So that was sort of the focus initially for them. And related to that, but significantly lower, we're dealing with family issues. I mean, being patient with, a mother who's living with you now and wasn't before, trying to support your child's online schooling. I had a couple of incidences of parents just struggling to keep teenagers home during the social distancing requests that we've been given. And so that was sort of the focus of that week for them. Now, I also wanted to look at, okay, what positive is coming out of this? So I had them report any benefits, any positive results from the work at home status that they had. And hugely, and repeatedly, people just reported, got a lot more time with my family. I'm taking walks with them. I'm able to eat lunch with my wife. When we talked about being able to be home with their baby. So that was clearly a major theme that people saw. And related to that just was that they had more time, primarily and directly related to not commuting as much. So, no commuting means more time. And sometimes it meant time with family. Sometimes it meant self-care, sleep, exercise, that kind of thing. So I think those are a couple of themes that are continue to be there and impact life after the coronavirus pandemic. And I think we're going to see more and more people want to work part-time from home and reduce that commuting. So those were, I was glad to see those positive results. Before we move to implications, I pulled some data from our 4-week study that just completed. And one of the interesting things about connecting with other people at work is that when we asked a question about how are people connecting with you and what do you value about that, 47% said I like being connected by video. So remember that theme from the past. And then also 40% said I just like the fact that occasionally somebody just checks in with me to see how I'm doing, because otherwise it feels like nobody's thinking about me. And then we asked about how are they connecting with others, and 47% said that they're trying to take initiative to check in with others as well. And then interestingly, dealing with stress and so forth, we looked at behaviors that people talk about that they're utilizing. And the 3 main ones that came out that are really having an impact, both of decreasing stress and increasing their positive experience, are getting adequate sleep, eating healthily, and thirdly, doing some rejuvenating activities, doing something new and different, maybe picking up a hobby that they used to do, or learning about something they hadn't done before, and that those really were sort of impacting into their mental health, if you will. So implications for leaders are, we need to understand that anxiety is there. It's both in the background and it's present. It's right there. And so I think helping people understand anxiety, that whole aspect that it's both about the future, and we can limit that, but also it's to motivate you to do something. And so figure out what you can do to manage the risk of what you're concerned about, and help them learn how to sort of think about that and evaluate how realistic are their fears. I mean, lots of times if we have financial concerns, all of a sudden, for some of us, we do what they call catastrophize, and now you're homeless, and living in a shelter with your family. Well, that could happen, but probably a lot of things have to happen to get there. And so don't worry about that so much as what can you do as far as limiting, your expenses right now to help keep your funds going as long as they can. And I think the other part is to focus on understanding your employees, and that means to understand what's going on with them personally. Talk to them, listen to them about what's going on at home, in their family. Maybe it's not in their home, but their parents who are back east or someplace else, the stressors that they're experiencing, and what kind of social support they have. Now, they may not share that with you if you're their manager or whatever, but you want to sort of make sure that they have some social support somewhere, whether that's friends, other employees, and so forth. And you need to understand that, so that when they're maybe a little bit scattered or not doing what you would like them to be able to do work-wise, you can understand they got a lot going on. And that we just have to understand that people, both employees and leaders, are going to respond differently the changes that they're experiencing. And so some are going to withdraw, and you're going to have to help them get past that sometimes. Some people want to act, but they just do stuff, but it's not really helpful stuff. So you have to help direct their energy into a way that is effective. And then empathy requires both cognitive understanding and emotional intelligence. Sometimes we need to help some of our people grow in emotional intelligence of that empathy, of compassion, of understanding feelings, of thinking about others rather than about themselves. So that can be a growth area for people. And then again, I just want to emphasize that compassion results in action. So sometimes you can help your leaders or team members say, okay, we're concerned about maybe this team member whose spouse has lost a job or they've got health issues. What can we do to help out? And then develop a plan to do that. That's really where it's going to make a difference. And then I think the other part of the implication is to talk with your team members and discuss the positive changes that can come out of this. That maybe, even from a business point of view, maybe you don't need as many offices or office space as you've had, because you can have people share an office in 2 days, 3 days, that kind of thing, or other ways to stay connected without people traveling in an hour, hour and a half every day. And then develop a plan for showing appreciation to your team members. People are feeling pretty disconnected. And we don't have those sort of chance encounters. So, man, I think it's really important to make a plan to call, set up a video conference with somebody. And actually, like I said, we'll give you the handouts if you email me at Yes, Dr. Paul. But also we have a remote version of our assessment, the appreciation at work. Motivating by appreciation inventory, and it has actions that are related to working remotely. And I want to right now, I think we're selling that at 50% off to just give people an introduction to that, so you can see how to help your team members. And then our website's appreciationatwork.com. So, I think the issue, and we'll move to some questions. Hopefully that's working for us here, but we just need to lead our team members with authenticity, encouragement, honesty, and hope. One of the things is you have to be, to really sort of be authentic, you have to be honest about, okay, we're okay for right now, not sure about the future. You don't want to sort of paint the picture that you can't fulfill, and you don't want to overreact and say, we'll deal with it. We're going to learn, go through this together. So, Mike, can you hear me?
I can, and I appreciate you powering through on that. I should ask, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, we had another work from home challenge is connectivity for meetings and GoToMeeting and Zoom clearly. So that we can add that to our list of new stressors, I guess. The good news is people, there was a segment of the group that was able to hear throughout, but there were a lot of folks that are interested in the recording of this because there were parts that were on and off. But lots of great data, and thank you so much for sharing it. We've got some questions that we want to get to, and I guess maybe we'll start with one from Patricia. And Patricia asked, are there any examples of tools to manage employee anxiety? What tools have you seen to address that?
Yeah, I find that there's an approach called cognitive behavior psychology, and where it's just teaching yourself to think right about stuff. I'm trying to come up with some authors off the top of my head, and I'll research some. But basically, we know there's two aspects to anxiety. One, there is a physiological aspect that some people are sort of more prone to become anxious. It's just like I say, we all have sort of our favorite bad feeling. It can be depression, it could be anger, frustration, or anxiety. And so there is a physiological component where people are more likely to go that way, where they're just triggered. But the other part we know is that it has a lot to do with our thinking. And let me say this. So one of the negative behaviors that we saw was binge watching the news. And that is not helpful around anxiety. That what we want to do is, because there's really not that much difference in what's going to happen as it impacts us daily from the morning to the evening. I mean, if we check the morning and check the evening, you're probably good to go. And maybe not even that much for some of us. So part of it is monitoring what we allow to into our heads and sort of fill our thoughts, because we can get anxious about all kinds of things, but to focus on the present and what's going on right now and what you can do right now. As far as tools, that's really the best thing. But I'll look into a couple of helpful self-help books around that as well.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that. But lots of questions coming in. I'm trying to distill a number at the same time. There were some questions about appreciation and recognition. It was interesting, some of the stats that you gave early on about what percentage of managers feel they do a good job of recognition, what percentage of employees feel that they've received recognition. I think one of the things that we're seeing, and a lot of what you described aligns with that, is those were the numbers when people had those chance encounters that could bring forward recognition. And now with fewer encounters of that nature, fewer face-to-face interactions, people just have to be much more intentional about recognition and interaction, don't they?
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. And just I do a fair amount of speaking and writing about recognition and appreciation, and generally, I mean, they overlap for sure, but in a lot of places, recognition is largely about performance, and that's fine. It was designed that way to both recognize and reward people for doing the right thing, and we want that to happen. But there are times that we want to just value and appreciate somebody just for a person, because some research shows that about 15% of the workforce is impacted by recognition programs as far as awards and so forth. And that leaves you a big middle group, 50 to 60% of your team, that aren't hearing much. And if they aren't appreciated, they're at risk for leaving. And I think that's maybe less of a case now because of the work situation, but we know that it's about them as a person. And so it's not always a performance. We can value some other aspect of them. I like to work with cheerful people more than grumpy people. And so I can, maybe somebody that's still learning the job and getting up to speed, but I can say, I just love to hear you laugh. You got a great smile, and thanks for sharing that with the rest of us. It brightens up the room. So it's not always about getting things done. And I think we need to incorporate that, or it could even be outside of work of, man, you do a great job of, caring for your kids and educating them. And I'm just really impressed with that. So, there are differences, and both really help.
Yeah, that's great input. I think there were a couple questions that had come in that were surrounded about getting employees to open up, and how do you try to engage people through dialogue without seeming too prying.
Right.
Or something of that nature. What are the open-ended questions that you would encourage?
Yeah, so I think it's an important piece, and that is that if you want to have people be personal with you, you need to be personal with them. It's a two-way relationship. Sometimes as leaders, we want people to share what's going on with them, but we're reluctant to do so for a variety of reasons. And you need to be careful about that. I think just pure sort of openness is not always wise, but you can share a little bit about what's going on with you, and either challenges that you're having to work through or things that you're learning, and that usually people will mirror that. In other words, they will sort of share to the same level that you do. And so the best way to start that is to start by often sharing, not too long, it's not about you, but for the purpose of saying, I've sort of been learning this. What kind of things have you been learning? And again, try to make it an open-ended question versus a yes/no kind of question.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. One of the things that one of the best online meetings that I've gone to during this shelter-in-place timeframe, the meeting was started with dialogue about Tiger King, right? Because everyone's watched that over the course of the last, and what flowed out of that was more open communication. So, some of those starters and engaging ways that you would start a meeting or an interaction with an employee if you were face to face, you got to apply those. So I think we have one more question, and let's tackle this one, and that is, how do you encourage leadership to spend time on increasing the emotional intelligence and create more authentic appreciation within a company in today's environment?
Wow. So it actually sort of filters down to how do you help other people change or see the need to change or to invest in their people to change. And those are all difficult tasks, and they're actually multiple step tasks. So the first part of that is you need to worry about yourself first. We're sort of experts at, hey, you need to change, but it's sort of the pot calling the kettle black, and so you got to focus on yourself first. And that's a good starting point. Secondly, with that, model what you want to see happen. So if it's around having open-ended conversations and you want to help people to do that so that they learn to understand people, you need to model that. So there's that. And then there's sort of ways to subtly and over time introduce people to concepts. So for example, with our appreciation work, we've got some very simple, 1-2 page introduction articles. We have, some 2 to 3 minute videos. And so you share those and say, hey, I found this sort of interesting. I thought you might be interested in that. Or if you're the leader of the team, say, hey, I found this, let's watch this together. That's the best way to make sure they watch it, is you watch it together. And then share other resources as you move on. And hopefully you'll start to, and then you want to respond to whatever they respond to. Don't just pick a direction and go for it, but listen to their response and try to respond to what they're interested in or what the need they see. And it may be a little bit around the barn, but you're more likely to get there if you just try to push through your own direction.
Great. Well, we're up against our time. Dr. White, it's always such a terrific pleasure to have you and your experience and knowledge shared with such a wide range of people. We're appreciative of that, sharing your research and experience. We're very appreciative of so many people attending the webcast and also fighting through some of the technology challenges that we dealt with. But we made it through that. Lots of great questions. We answered many of them. Some of them we're going to need to respond. Some of them are more up your alley, Dr. White. Others are more up the Terryberry alley when we're talking about recognition and so forth. Thanks to Kelsey for organizing this, and obviously Justin and Mike for fielding so many of these questions. I'll leave with 2 items. One is, certainly if you're interested in other educational webinars from Terryberry, please visit us at terryberry.com/webinars. We've got other educational opportunities on hand. If you're interested in developing a recognition strategy to engage your remote workforce, GiveAWow Connect is a way that you can do that at no charge to see the impact that can have. We'd love to show you what that can look like. So please let us know if that's something you're interested in exploring. And we wish everybody a safe and healthy return to normalcy, whatever new normal looks like. And stay healthy, wash your hands, everyone, and keep social distance. Thanks so much for being part of our hour together. Have a great day.